the SNP want any guidance on how to deal with energy costs, they could look at the £100 million emergency package announced by Scottish Labour only a few days ago. But I have to express concern. If they are serious about energy, maybe they could tell us what happened to the publicly owned energy company promised so long ago by Nicola Sturgeon, because the Scottish public are still waiting.
Secretary of State Andrew Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in a long litany of failure, surely the most egregious of all that the Scottish National Party has inflicted on Scotland has been the lack of any discernible growth whatsoever. Indeed, had Scotland's economy grown at the same rate as the rest of the UK's from 2010, Scotland could be up to £10 billion a year richer. At the same time, its benefits bill is set to soar to £9 billion by 2030. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that Scotland needs change?
I certainly agree that Scotland needs change. Whether it's the industrial level waste of the Scottish Government in relation to money, £500 million on ferries. The First Minister went to Stornoway last week. This week, the boat that he travelled on broke down. A third of the CalMac fleet out of commission over Easter. So whether it is their waste of resources, whether it's their failure on public services or their abject failure in economic growth, Scotland needs and deserves change.
Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more, but change won't come from a weak and feeble Labour Party that over the last 5 years has nodded through and supported every single one of the SNP's madcap schemes, including, though they won't admit it now, the dangerous gender recognition reform stopped by us. The SNP has failed Scotland, but Scotland now has the worst of both worlds. Two economically illiterate socialist governments engage in a staggeringly depressing game of top trumps in a desperate race to the bottom. National insurance, family farm tax, the North Sea, business rates, Labour and the SNP strangling economic growth in
Mr. Speaker, the last time I checked, it was actually Scottish Conservative votes in Holyrood that sustained Alex Salmond's government in power. So we're not going to take any lectures from that party about somehow being the SNP's little helpers. The reality is reform are the SNP's little helpers in this election, and after the comments last night, it's pretty clear the SNP are reform's little helpers too.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Susan Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The SNP are willing to support the Chinese economy in buying buses from China that raise serious security concerns. But when it comes to supporting defence jobs at a British-owned Rolls-Royce site in Glasgow, they pulled the funding. Does the Minister agree with me that the SNP are failing Scotland both on jobs and on security?
Mr. Speaker, thank you for that question. It tells you everything you need to know about the base politics of the SNP, that they suggest that if you are pro-national security, you're somehow anti-Scottish. That helps explain why they weren't willing to fund the Welding Centre on the Clyde, delivering hundreds of apprenticeships and secure jobs for decades to come. It explains why they are weak on our own defence, supporting unilateral nuclear disarmament, notwithstanding the arrival of Vladimir Putin's ambitions on the international stage. If Scotland wants to benefit from being part of a strong and secure United Kingdom, I hope we will decisively reject the SNP on May the 7th.
Rebecca Paul.
Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Needs a minister first.
There we are. I got there in the end. Mr. Speaker, last month, alongside the Chancellor, I met oil and gas industry leaders to discuss the impact of geopolitical volatility on energy prices. The Chancellor reaffirmed her commitment to backing Britain's oil and gas industry, recognising its pivotal role in supporting growth and jobs, especially in Scotland. The Chancellor has been clear that she wants the Energy Profits Levy to come to an end, but the crisis in the Middle East has had real-time consequences on oil and gas prices, as we can all see, and it is right that we respond to this robustly.
Rebecca Paul.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer. And I welcome the warm welcome. Lovely. The oil and gas sector is a vital industry, not just in Scotland, but for the whole of the UK. Does the Secretary of State share the disappointment of this side of the House that the Chancellor deterred a reported £17.5 billion of private investment into the oil and gas sector by choosing to retain the Energy Profits Levy last month? Money that would have supported thousands of Scottish jobs, delivering growth and energy security for the UK.
Mr. Speaker, I'd respectfully point out it was actually the Conservative government who introduced EPL. Why did they introduce EPL? To deal with excess profits generated by a geopolitical crisis. What we're living through at the moment in the conflict in the Middle East makes the case for dealing with excess profits from some of the largest energy companies in the world.
Melody Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ExxonMobil plant at Mossmoran in my constituency has now ceased production after the company said last year that they'd not made a profit for 5 years. News that our UK Labour government has made £9 million available to support the affected workforce and find a future for the site has been warmly welcomed by my constituents, especially in Cowdenbeath. Does the Secretary of State agree that it's in the interest of the people of Fife for the Scottish and UK governments to work together to utilise all available funding and find a viable future that brings jobs back to the site?
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I pay generous tribute to the tireless efforts of the Honourable Lady on behalf of her constituents in relation to the challenge faced by the Mossmoran workforce. She has been a powerful and consistent advocate for the workforce and the changes that we needed to see. That's why I'm proud that the UK Government has been actively marketing the site to potential investors and stands ready, as she says, to invest up to £9 million to secure a successful future for the site and to support the local economy.
I'm just sorry we didn't get to John Lamont's question. He's 50 today and I believe his parents are watching it. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Warren Edwards.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Southport inquiry report is truly harrowing, and I cannot imagine the pain that it will cause the families of all those affected. We will make the changes needed to honour the victims, the injured and the families, and our thoughts remain with the loved ones of Elsie, Bibi and Alice and all of those impacted. Mr. Speaker, today marks 37 years since the Hillsborough disaster, when 97 men, women and children went to a football match and never returned. My promise remains, working with families, we will deliver a Hillsborough law to end the injustice that they have suffered and ensure the state will always act for the people that it serves. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister was right to resist us being drawn into an ill-conceived war in the Middle East with apparently no clear plan for how it may end. And despite the welcome cost of living support he referenced in his statement on Monday, we are all rightly angry that our constituents will feel the impact of this war in their pockets and in their daily lives. Can he outline what steps he is taking both to support our armed forces and to plan for all future contingencies? We all hope for a swift resolution and progress at the summit later this week, but must be prepared for all potential scenarios.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend, the Royal Engineers in her constituency, and all those serving our country at home and abroad. We're proud to be investing a record £9 billion to deliver quality homes that they deserve. We're turning around army recruitment after the party opposite missed targets for 14 years. But the foremost responsibility to our armed forces are the decisions we take on military actions. My principles are clear. That's a sharp contrast to the Leader of the Opposition, who wanted to jump into the war with both feet without thinking through the consequences.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bill.
Mr. Speaker, that was a very interesting answer from the Prime Minister. Lord Robertson, who authored the government's Strategic Defence Review, has said the Prime Minister has a corrosive complacency when it comes to defence. Why did he say that?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying I respect Lord Robertson, and I thank him again. I thank him again for carrying out the strategic review. My responsibility is to keep the British people safe, and that is a duty I take seriously. That is why I don't agree with his comments. Last February, that was 7 months after taking office, I took the decision to increase defence spending from 2.3 to 2.6%, paid for by a difficult decision on overseas aid. Last June, at the NATO summit, and committed to raising core defence spending to 3.5%. Last November, Mr Speaker, the budget committed record funding to defence. I reaffirm those commitments now. The Strategic Defence Review is a 10-year blueprint for national security. The Defence Investment Plan will put that into effect. It will be published as soon as possible. We need to get it right. We inherited plans that were uncosted and undeliverable, and we're not going to repeat those mistakes.
Mr Speaker, he says he doesn't agree with Lord Robertson. Lord Robertson is a former Labour Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary-General. He also said, and I quote, "We are underprepared, we are underinsured, we are under attack." He said...
Order. Sorry? No. I don't think it looks good, shouting somebody down at the dispatch box. Come back on.
Mr Speaker, Lord Robertson's criticisms were of the Prime Minister, and he said Britain's national security is in peril. Our armed forces are at the end of their tether, waiting for this government to fund the Strategic Defence Review. There are still 2 weeks of the parliamentary session left. So why wouldn't the Prime Minister publish the Defence Investment Plan before then?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I remind the House that we put in place the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. Mr Speaker, let me spell that out. That means we're spending £270 billion over this Parliament. That's £5 billion more this year, with defence funding increasing every year. These are record amounts, Mr Speaker, decisions of a Labour Prime Minister, a Labour Chancellor and a Labour government. And what a contrast. When they came into office, defence spending was 2.5%. When they left, it was 2.3%. When they came into office, the army was 100,000. When they left office, 72,000. They cut frigates and destroyers by 25%. They cut mine hunters by 50%. She said at the weekend, our defence is the weakest for 400 years. That is what they left behind.
Mr Speaker, he's talking about the biggest sustained increase. Talking about an increase is not the same as giving an increase. The military and the defence industry want to hear about what he's going to do, not him prosecuting past governments. He promised the Defence Investment Plan would be published. He promised that the Defence Investment Plan would be published last autumn. I asked him at PMQs 6 weeks ago when it would be published. He had no idea. It is now the middle of April. What's the hold-up?
Mr Speaker, I've set out my position. The Defence Investment Plan is the first line-by-line review of defence budgets for 18 years. She talks about talking. If you're going to support and make your country safe, you have to get the right calls on the big issues. She called for us to jump into the war. They could pretend otherwise. I remember walking in, standing here for the first time, saying we would not get drawn into the war, we would not join the offensive, and they all shouted, shame. They remember it. I remember it. They're just embarrassed by it now. A week later, when she realised she'd made a massive error of judgment, she attempted the mother of all U-turns. That didn't work. So this weekend she said, when I said we should jump into the war, she said this weekend, Mr Speaker, that what she meant, she was talking about verbal support.
Prime Minister, it's Prime Minister's questions. We've got to concentrate.
Just answer the question.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister loves to misrepresent my position on Iran. He does. He loves to misrepresent it. Let's stop talking about what I didn't say. Let's start talking about what he isn't doing. Mr Speaker, you will recall that on Monday, I offered to work with the Prime Minister to identify the welfare savings we need. What did he say? No thanks. Now that Lord Robertson has said, and I quote, we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget. Will the Prime Minister think again and work with us to find savings to fund defence?
Prime Minister.
She was clear in what she was saying. She said we should give verbal support. I suppose that's standing on the side and saying, get in there, good luck, mate, you've got this. Mr. Speaker, that is her proof. We are reforming welfare and spending more on defence. They did neither. The welfare bill rose by £88 billion on their watch. It soared by £33 billion under the shadow Chancellor's watch. We're fixing it. What did they do? They voted against it. They voted to keep the broken system. So taking advice from the party opposite on reforming welfare and defence spending is like asking Liz Truss how to keep your mortgage down.
This is so poor from the Prime Minister. This is Labour MPs are laughing. Labour MPs are laughing, Mr. Speaker. This is a moment of profound national seriousness. And what are they doing? They're promoting sex toys in Parliament. That's what they're doing. Mr. Speaker, it gives a whole new meaning to fiddling while Rome burns. Mr. Speaker, it is being... That's what they're doing, Mr. Speaker. Let's get back to the issue of the Defence Investment Plan and defence spending. It is being reported that the Treasury is asking the MOD to make £3.5 billion worth of cuts this year. He won't fund our military because he wants to fund more welfare. That's why he has a welfare plan to 2031, but no defence investment plan at all. Now that the Chagos surrender deal is dead, will the Prime Minister put the billions saved from ditching Chagos into defence, or is that going into welfare as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are spending more on defence. Record amounts on defence. £270 billion in this Parliament, £5 billion extra. And she talks about the Chancellor. It's because of the decisions of this Chancellor we've got the biggest boost to defence spending since the Cold War. We've also got the biggest pay rise for our armed forces for over 20 years. We've also got the biggest investment in military housing for over half a century. What did they do at the budget? They voted against all of that.
That sounds like he doesn't want to spend the Chagos money on defence. Well, Mr. Speaker, Labour MPs will know Lord Robertson, a former Defence Secretary, a former NATO Secretary General. He is Labour through and through. They all need to think about why he stuck his head above the parapet. I went through the Strategic Defence Review with Lord Robertson last year. The Lib Dems and Reform refused to meet him. No other party is taking this seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very specific question. In January 2024, Conservatives approved an upgrade of destroyers like HMS Dragon so they can better intercept ballistic missiles. In July 2024, the Prime Minister paused that plan. Will he immediately approve and fund that critical upgrade now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Dragon was commissioned by a Labour government, as it happened. But she stands there and says, please forget the fact that we hollowed out the armed forces. Please clear up our mess. I went to the Gulf last week and thanked our armed forces for protecting British lives. She said we should have jumped into the war without thinking about the consequences. Then said, oh no, we shouldn't be in the war the next week. Now she says, what I meant was we should give verbal support.
Order. The front bench, I expect them to be quiet here. I also expect it, but it's the same people. I suspect next week you won't be in for PMQs if it carries on. Prime Minister.
In addition to saying her position is we should just say to Americans, get in there, she insulted our armed forces, Mr. Speaker, saying that they were just hanging around. These were pilots who, within 2 hours of this conflict, were up risking their lives, taking missiles out of the sky, and she insulted them. And she's never apologised for that. She said a few weeks ago that serious times call for serious people. She is not one of them.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister said, 37 years today, 97 innocent children, women and men, went to a football match and were unlawfully killed at the hands of a corrupt state. I was at Hillsborough, and I was one of the lucky ones who survived and walked away. As parliamentary lead to the Hillsborough law, I stand here with a huge sense of obligation to the 97, all the families, including my constituent Debbie Matthews, every survivor and every victim of a state cover-up, who were all part of this collective campaign. There are signs of progress after last night's government concessions, but we've heard this before. Prime Minister, this is your responsibility. It is within your power to take control of this process and make good on your promise to deliver this legislation. So will you commit today to ruling out any carve-out for security services and finally delivering a full Hillsborough law worthy of the name, or will they be failed by the state once again?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know, as my honourable friend has just said, that he himself was at Hillsborough. And can I thank him for his decades of campaigning for justice. I am personally committed to working with the families to get this bill right. It is integral that their views are heard. We're discussing this precise issue with the families, and we'll make sure that he is fully updated. I reaffirm my commitment to delivering the legislation, to ensuring the duty of candour applies to all public servants.
Trent David, Leader of the Liberal Democrat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the words of the Prime Minister about the Southport inquiry and also the 37th anniversary of the Hillsborough tragedy? Our thoughts are with all the families affected and the survivors, and I hope he will deliver on the Hillsborough law. Today, Mr. Speaker, also marks the 3rd anniversary of the start of the devastating civil war in Sudan. I hope he will recommit to real action in the face of the world's greatest humanitarian catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, in a phone call with Sky News last night, President Trump has threatened to rip up his trade deal with the UK as punishment for us not joining his idiotic war in Iran. Mr. Speaker, this must be the last straw. Surely the Prime Minister can't send our King to meet a man who treats our country like a mafia boss running a protection racket.
Minister.
Can I join him in his comments about Sudan? We often overlook the fact this is the greatest humanitarian crisis facing the world at the moment. My position on the Iran war has been clear from the start. We're not going to get dragged into this war. It is not our war. And a lot of pressure has been applied to me to take a different course. And that pressure included what happened last night. I'm not going to change my mind. I'm not going to yield. It is not in our national interest to join this war, and we will not do so. I know where I stand. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the King's visit, the purpose of the visit is to mark the 250th anniversary of relations and independence, obviously, of the US. The monarchy is an important reminder of the long-standing bonds and enduring relationship between our two countries, which are far greater than anyone who occupies any particular office at any particular time.
Sir Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, President Trump is one of the most unpredictable people we have seen on the world stage, and I hope he does not embarrass our monarch. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, last year the Prime Minister claimed he'd done some special deal, so Brits will be able to sail through e-gates at EU airports. But that's not the experience of families returning from holiday this week. Long queues at borders and passport controls are the latest symbol of the Brexit disaster. But they're also a symbol of this government's failure to repair that damage. So will the Prime Minister apologise for misleading British travellers? And can he tell them when they will be able to sail through passport control?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've made it very clear that I think our national interest lies in closer relationship with the EU on defence, security, energy and the economy. And I was very pleased that at last year's summit we did negotiate an agreement on e-gates, and we're pushing hard on that. We have another summit this year where I intend not just to make good on what we've already agreed, but to go closer to the EU in the relations that we have.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was Prime Minister Questions, a meeting with the Prime Minister for myself and Arsenal hero Michael Thomas. We are still waiting, and I cannot back down. Not just have working-class footballers and others lost hundreds of millions to financial mis-selling, but the V11 group is still being pursued by HMRC for tax on money that they have never had. The Post Office and other injustices have been actioned. Why not the V11?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her dedicated campaigning on this really important issue? I have met Michael Thomas and heard his experiences, and I share her concern about young, predominantly working-class people being exploited. I do want to make progress as quickly as possible. I've asked the Chief Secretary to meet the V11 group on what further steps the government can take to support these affected, and I'll make sure that that's reported back to her so she's fully updated on what's going on.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, people voted for change. But what have they got? More of the same. Yeah. But it hasn't been them that have let down their end of the bargain. My constituents are working themselves to the bone. And let's be absolutely clear, they are working and still having to claim benefits. There's not a single section of society, whether it's farmers, care workers, students, you name it, they have been let down. And I don't want that to be the case. We need to show that this House works for them, because actors will step into that space. People would love nothing more than our democracy to be toppled, because we cannot show our people a better way of life. We used to say to people, if you work hard, you get on in life. That hasn't been the case for years. Will this government now change economic and fiscal course and deliver for people in the worst cost of living crisis?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, wages are going up higher in the first year of this Labour government they did in the 10 years of the party opposite being in power. We've taken the decision at the budget to cut energy bills across the country. I was in Northern Ireland, as she knows, just a few weeks ago, making the announcement about heating oil, which is obviously of huge concern in Northern Ireland, hearing what people had to say, putting in place £53 million. The authorities in Northern Ireland will administer that, but we're looking more widely at what we can do.
Jodie Gosling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this government, George Eliot Hospital in my constituency is thriving, rapidly soaring up league tables, ending corridor care, and now welcome an expansion to our community diagnostic centre with a new breast cancer diagnosis unit. Yet the same staff delivering this life-saving care for Nuneaton are suffering horrific abuse, much of which appears to be racially motivated. The staff I've met believe that right-wing marchers who don't even live in my town doing Nazi salutes on our high street are fanning the flames of hatred towards their colleagues. Will the Prime Minister join me in condemning acts of violence against the dedicated staff at George Eliot and join me in celebrating their achievements, possibly with a visit to our CDC to see their excellent work and show their deep gratitude for their service and resilience?
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Violence against our NHS staff is despicable, and we're introducing a new offence to protect emergency workers from harassment. In terms of the congratulations, can I thank all our hard work of our NHS staff who've delivered 5 million extra appointments in our first year in government. Mr. Speaker, we're going further. This week we've announced 36 new and expanded community diagnostic centres across the country, including expanded services in Nuneaton. That's the difference a Labour government makes.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, there is severe hardship being experienced by businesses, consumers and families right across the United Kingdom. Not just normal cost of living costs, but fuel costs is exceptionally high and getting higher. There are protests being organised as we speak for next week. Prime Minister, we need action delivered as quickly as possible in order to ensure that these protests don't escalate out of control and people see that politics matters, governments listen and take action rather than just offer words.
Can I thank him for his question? I know that his constituents and all of those in Northern Ireland are concerned about the impact that the war in Iran is having on them. I was in Northern Ireland just a few weeks ago where I spoke directly to party leaders and we announced what we're doing in that regard on heating oil. Obviously, fuel duty is frozen until September. Energy bills have been reduced. And we've also made it clear that we wouldn't tolerate profiteering or unfair practices, which was a particular concern raised with me when I was over in Northern Ireland. The most important thing we can do is to de-escalate the conflict and get the Straits of Hormuz open, and that's why I'm co-hosting the summit on Friday in order to make progress on both those fronts.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister firstly for his words earlier in relation to the horrific attack in my constituency, and also for the work that the government is now doing as a result. The families affected do not want their lives to be defined by the attack, and we must not allow my great town to be defined by it either. That's why I'm asking for the Prime Minister's help to ensure that my town's best days lie ahead of it. My council is helping to bring empty town centre properties back into residential use. It's a much-needed corrective after years of decline and neglect from the previous government. But more needs to be done. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that our town centres need place-based funding, and will he back me in my bid for Southport to be included in the next round of Pride in Place support?
Prime Minister.
Can I just say, having sat with him and the families of those impacted in Southport, in his constituency a number of times, can I just thank him for everything that he did and is continuing to do in response to that awful attack? And can I agree with him wholeheartedly that Southport cannot be defined by what happened in that awful, tragic incident, and therefore he is right to have the pride that he does have in his community. I'm delighted we're investing in reopening the iconic Southport Pier. We're investing, Mr. Speaker, £5.8 billion through our Pride in Place Fund to cut power and resources and put them into the hands of nearly 300 communities. And only a Labour government will deliver this kind of change.
Ms. Cockey.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welfare spending is set to rise by another £70 billion by 2030. And the last time I asked the Prime Minister about this, he said he was mending the system. Well, since then, Mr. Speaker, this disastrous Labour government have raised taxes on working people to give even more to those who don't. The people I speak to across Broxbourne think that this Labour government are taking them for mugs. So what does the Prime Minister say to working people across this United Kingdom who are being asked to pay more and are getting less?
I'll tell them they were let down very badly by the last government for 14 years, and we're clearing up the mess.
Julie Binns.
Mr. Speaker, in the last week alone, 2 Scottish pensioners have been hospitalised following a collision with an illegal e-bike, and a 10-year-old boy in Grimsby was injured by another. The new Product and Regulation and Metrology Act gives government the power to define these bikes as unsafe and ban them from sale. Will the Prime Minister reassure my Carlisle constituents that the government will use these new powers to rid our streets of the menace of illegal e-bikes?
Well, my honourable friend is a tenacious campaigner on this issue, and I thank her for that. We launched a major programme of reform of the UK's product safety regulation. This will help tackle unsafe products being sold online, including non-compliant e-bikes and the batteries that power them. Mr. Speaker, we're also giving the police new powers to take unsafe e-bikes off the roads and destroy them without issuing a warning beforehand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yates Station is at the heart of the town's industrial area and can be a gateway to the eastern end of the Western Innovation Arc. Local rail users tell me they want it improved. Businesses stress its importance for attracting a workforce, and in the wake of local manufacturing job losses, its redevelopment could be a catalyst for wider regeneration. There are already proposals in the town's master plan, so will the Prime Minister back jobs growth by supporting the redevelopment of Yates Station?
Prime Minister. I thank the honourable member. We're providing the West of England Combined Authority with over £750 million to invest in their priorities. That could include improving services and station facilities at Yate, and I know she'll make her voice heard in relation to that. I'm pleased construction is already underway at new stations at Charfield and North Filton. We've upgraded the Filton Bank line as well, enabling more frequent, reliable services in the region.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first thank the nurses, the doctors, the radiographers and the receptionists who were not on strike when I tripped and broke my wrist last week. Now, after years of neglect, Labour is rebuilding our NHS.
including the West Suffolk Hospital at Bury St Edmunds and the new dental school at the UEA. Now, does the Prime Minister share my genuine alarm, as a surgeon who's worked at the front line for more than 40 years, that the vague social insurance proposals of some of our opponents would be the end of our NHS and seriously threaten the health and well-being of millions of our fellow citizens?
Prime Minister.
Can I wish him a speedy recovery? He obviously speaks with great authority and experience on our NHS, and he's right to point out that waiting lists are the lowest for 3 years, A&E waiting times are the best for 4 years, and ambulance response times are faster for 5 years. That's because of the investment that we put in and they opposed. But I wonder how much my honourable friend would have been charged if he had arrived at a reform hospital under an insurance-based scheme. That would turn the clock back. The NHS is on the road to recovery. Don't risk it with reform.
Nicky Slade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Dorset Wildlife Trust and the people of Dorset for their incredible efforts to secure Upton Heath for nature after part of this internationally designated site was put up for sale after decades-old planning consent was being used for mineral extraction? We've worked round the clock to raise hundreds of thousands secured just last night to buy the site. But the value was inflated by this permission from the 1950s, which should never have applied to a site of special scientific interest. Will the Prime Minister demonstrate his government's commitment to nature by committing to legislate to extinguish historic planning consents without compensation on sites that achieve international environmental designation?
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable member, and relevant ministers are happy to discuss with her the specific site that she mentions at greater depth, and reassure her we're committed to protecting our countryside. Our land use framework balances restoring nature with meeting demands of homes and energy. We've just announced £60 million. That's a record amount to support nature and threatened species.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I greatly welcome the government's announcement to open up a youth hub in Luton to help bring together jobs, skills and wellbeing support in one place. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that after years of neglect under the previous Conservative government, it's this Labour government that's investing in the future of our young people?
Can I start by congratulating Luton Town on winning at Wembley? Coached, of course, by Jack Wilshere, a great ex-Arsenal star. I'm delighted her constituency is benefiting from a new youth hub, one of the 80 additional hubs that we're launching across the country. That stark contrast to what we inherited. Over 1,000 youth centres were closed under the Tories. Spending on youth services was slashed by 73%. Labour's bringing youth clubs back, and we're proud to do so, building a better future for our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 25 years on Prince's Risborough High Street, retailer Cado have said they are closing, citing hikes in business rates and the increases on taxation on employing people amongst their reasons. A few yards up on Duke Street, Salon 24 Hair, for the first time in 21 years, cannot afford to take on a new apprentice. How many more businesses need to close, jobs be lost, and apprenticeship opportunities trashed need to happen before this Prime Minister understands that the practical outturn of his policies aren't working?
Well, I'm concerned to hear of those examples. We have put in place support for small businesses, and I'll make sure that's available to him to pass on to his constituents.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow night I will be hosting a public meeting about the chronically delayed Burntwood Health Centre. For over a decade, well over a decade, people in my town have been let down by the lack of this replacement facility. We thought there might be light at the end of the tunnel when we were promised it by the end of 2025, but the end of last year came and went, no health centre and not even a planning permission. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that the County Council, now led by Reform, have promised a new health centre to the people of Burntwood, and they must make sure that there are no more broken promises to my constituents?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's a great champion for his constituents, and it's shocking that they've been waiting over a decade for this practice. I agree with him, but sadly, Reform's leadership in Staffordshire is an absolute mess. They've had three leaders in 3 months. One of them forced to step down for appalling racist comments. and they're simply not getting on with the job. He's obviously proud of that. All you can count on for reform is chaos and division.
Final question, David Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, my constituents suffered the closure of the urgent care centre at Mount Vernon Hospital. And this year they face the loss of the cancer centre as well, leaving my most vulnerable constituents with long and difficult journeys to access life-saving and life-sustaining treatment. So will he encourage his Health Secretary to join in the U-turns and guarantee the future of Mount Vernon Hospital?
I don't know the particular details of his hospital, but I will make sure that they're looked into. We have put record investment into the NHS, but now he's raised that, I will make sure we look specifically into the case that he's raised here in this House.
Let the front benches change over. Right, we now come to the urgent question. Mark Francois.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting